Hi everyone, I'm back with the rest of Chapter 5, and if you remember yesterday where we left off, Socks was getting himself into quite a bit of trouble and playing with Nana's hair as a toy before he ended up going to bed and falling asleep in her suitcase. So I'm going to continue where we left off, and we'll have to see what happens to Socks. The next morning, Socks was awakened by Nana groping for her bedroom slippers. The hair on her head, her second best hair, was shorter and grayer than the hair on the carpet. Socks yawned so hard that his ears lay back and his pink tongue stretched out of his mouth. He eased his muscles by humping his back like a Halloween cat and leaped onto the carpet, where he proceeded with his morning wash. "Well," said Nana in a whisper, "just what do you think you're doing in here?" Socks did not care for the tone of her voice. He paused long enough to give her an insolent look, as if to say, "I belong here and you do not," before he continued licking his fur. Soon he turned his head away from Nana to reach the difficult spot behind his shoulder. Nana, who had not rested well on the lumpy couch, was buttoning her robe when she noticed the empty styrofoam head on the floor. She was quick to discover her best hair on the carpet. With an angry, "Oh," she snatched it up and stared at it while Socks pretended to ignore her. The Brickers were now awake. Water ran in the bathroom, and Mr. Bricker's electric razor buzzed. You cat," whispered Nana. "Look what you've done." Socks looked, but not for long. Grooming his immaculate white paws was more important. He found a bit of dried mud between his toes, which needed attention. Nana examined the netting inside the wig, and in the desk drawer she found some Scotch tape. That she used to make some hasty repairs. Then she set what was once her best hair on the styrofoam head and went to work with her hairbrush. She smoothed and brushed, she patted and poked, she pinched waves into the place and rolled the ends of her fingers. When she was sure the bathroom was free, she picked up her hair and her clothes and stalked from the living room. Charles William began to fuss. Socks was waiting by the refrigerator when Mrs. Bricker arrived to warm the bottle. "Out of the way, Socks," said Mrs. Bricker, giving him a gentle shove with her foot so she could open the refrigerator door. Socks meowed and rubbed against her ankles while she set the bottle in a pan of water on the stove. Mr. Bricker appeared with Charles William, still dressed in sleepers, in his arms. "Mommy is getting her baby's breakfast just as fast as she can," said Mrs. Bricker, in the voice that Socks resented when it was not used to address him. Nana joined the family in the kitchen. The sight of her hair silenced her daughter-in-law and made her sons stare. Odd little tufts poked out from the once smooth curls. The silence, broken by the quivery sobs of a hungry baby, was awkward. "Mom, what happened to your hair?" asked her son. He did not approve of his mother wearing a wig. The Brickers thought hair should look natural. "Nothing," said Nana bravely. "It was nothing, really. Nothing a trip to the hairdresser won't repair." Mr. Bricker was not satisfied. "Something must have happened to make your hair look like a bird's nest. Bill," Mrs. Bricker's voice held a warning as Socks purred and rubbed against her leg. He was every bit as hungry as Charles William, but he was much pleasanter. Nana frowned at Socks in spite of all the charm. "Socks," said Mrs. Bricker accusingly, "did you get into Nana's hair?" Attention at last. Socks stood on his hind legs with his front paws braced against Mrs. Bricker and increased the volume of his purr. "Oh, you bad cat!" Mrs. Bricker unhooked his claws from her housecoat. Charles William drooled and wept. The water on the stove began to bubble and splash over the edge of the pan, hissing as it hit the burners. "Now see what you made me do? The bottle is too hot, and it takes forever to cool." She removed the pan from the stove and replaced the boiling water with cold water. Socks did not care for the treatment he was getting. These people were wasting too much time. They neither fed him nor attended to the baby. "Nana, I'm terribly sorry," said Mrs. Bricker. "I was sure Socks was shut up in the laundry. I guess we didn't give the door the extra shove that it needed. If you don't give it that, Now, Marilyn, don't worry about a thing," said Nana, determined not to cause trouble. "I'll have my wig washed and set at the beauty shop, and everything will be all right. Now, what can I do to help?" "In a minute you can give Charles William his cereal." Mrs. Bricker tripped over Socks on her way to the cupboard for a custard cup. "Everything is so hectic because we forgot to set the alarm." Socks had endured too much delay from these chattering people. Charm had not worked. His patience was at its end. He nipped at Mrs. Bricker's ankle to remind her that he wanted his breakfast, and he wanted it now. 2 tiny drops of blood appeared on her bare leg. "Marilyn, that cat bit you!" Nana was shocked. "You're bleeding!" "Socks!" Mr. Bricker shouted in such a terrible voice that Socks was stunned. Never had his master spoken to him that way. He cringed against a cupboard and looked up at Mr. Bricker with wide, frightened eyes. A fussy, teething baby, a husband in a hurry to leave for his classes and his job in the university library, the strain of a mother-in-law in the house too small for guests, papers waiting to be typed, and the nipping cat were all too much for Mrs. Bricker. "Bill, get that cat out of here," she said with tears in her voice. "Please get that cat out of here before I go out of my mind." To his astonishment, Socks, who had not meant to hurt Mrs. Bricker, found himself lifted and dumped out the back door without so much as a kind word or a bite of breakfast. He stood lashing his tail in anger, and in a few minutes, when he began to understand that no one was going to let him in, he jumped to the sill of the dining room window, where he could see Nana holding Charles William and spooning cereal into his mouth. Mrs. Bricker, with a Band-Aid on her ankle, was dropping bread into the toaster, and Mr. Bricker was pouring cereal from a box. Socks meowed peevishly to let his owners know that he was cross, hungry, and unfairly treated. "Beat it, you cat," said Mr. Bricker as he reached for a carton of half and half. "We can't have a cat that bites in this house." "Oi, doi, doi," shouted Charles William, happy to be eating breakfast at last and secure in the love of his family. And there's a picture of Socks getting tossed out the back door. And that is the end of chapter 5. So I'm interested to know, friends, how some of you feel about Socks right now. He was trying really hard to do the right thing and purring and rubbing against the legs of his owner, but he still wasn't getting food and they weren't paying attention to him, so he ended up biting, and now he's in a lot of trouble, and he feels like he wasn't treated very fairly. So I'm interested to know how all of you are feeling for Socks as you heard today's part of the story. So keep up your awesome work. Know that I'm proud of you, and I'll be back tomorrow with chapter 6. Take care, friends.